So this is the Ironic project update. So I guess everyone should hopefully know what Ironic is. It is the bare metal service in OpenStack that supports both installation and deployment of operating systems and also the bare metal as a service use case. With that, our growth has been up 11% in the last year. Up to almost 20% of deployments are using Ironic presently. And during the Queen cycle, we had 143 different contributors that contributed to the Ironic code base. In the Queen cycle, we had a number of new features. We had a traits API that allows traits to be applied to a node. Specifically, those will be used later in case of actually applying configuration about a node or how that changes a deployment. We now have an Ansible deploy interface, which allows an operator to, authored by this person right here, that allows a more customized deployment of an instance or a much more customized deployment process for a very specific environment need. So if you need to do very particular things, you can write custom playbooks in Ansible that will then be executed as part of the deployment process. We now have support for routed networks in the flat network interface use case. This allows for a deployment to have top-of-rack switches doing layer 3 routing, and Neutron will now properly do the right thing. We now have a new agent called the Ironic Neutron agent, which is related to the routed network effort, which also now marks ports correctly once binding is completed. So instead of seeing Neutron ports with binding failed, you now see, was it binding complete? Yep. Binding complete. So, yay.
So, like that also, there's a whole dance between Neutron and Nova placement that means that the scheduling for what node is connected to what physical network works.
Yes. So what Sam is speaking in regards to is the service now also publishes physical network information into the placement so the placement can properly place instances via Ironic. API users are now able to replace the configuration drive, which is a very useful feature. Previously, when someone sent a rebuild command, we used the old configuration drive. I don't know how many people would actually know that. It's somewhat obscure knowledge at the same time, but it can be very frustrating because those configuration drives do usually contain the initial seed information or configuration used to deploy an instance. And we now have finally merged the long-awaited rescue API, which allows a user to get into a situation where they can recover an instance. This is useful when you have things like file system corruption, where you need to be able to get back onto the system. You can't just actually go and delete the system. Additional features in Queens. We now have an Xclarity hardware type. This is a driver that Lenovo has been working on. It ties in with their Xclarity controller. It's still a very new thing. The ILO driver now supports out-of-band iSCSI boot, which should make people fairly happy. And the IRMC driver, which is Fujitsu, now supports virtual media-based booting. Oh, no, whoops, sorry, UEFI-based booting. So far in Rocky, it's been a busy cycle, and we've got a number of things done, and we've got some things still in progress. So far, we have moved to all of our bug tracking and work tracking to storyboard. And that was remarkably easy, although the adjustment to that is a little more difficult because it's a completely different interface. We now have support to handle the SIG-up signals to allow basically for us to reload configuration. So you can turn on debug on the fly. What was that? RPC pinning?
Yeah, RPC object pinning.
I believe RPC object pinning landed in Queens.
Reload via SIG-up.
Oh, yes, you can also update the RPC pin with SIG-up. It's in the list of supported the 3 supported options. Currently in progress right now, we are working on a BIOS configuration framework and interface. This will require vendors to create BIOS configuration interfaces that will integrate into Ironic. Right now we don't have those, but we're focusing on the framework. That framework is making good progress. We should expect to see it in Rocky. We're also working on our documentation. We are making progress on supporting changing the boot mode for Redfish-based hardware. And we're also very quickly making progress on support of recovering from power fault situations or situations where we were unable to talk to the BMC. Currently, when you lose connectivity to the BMC for a long enough period of time, the node goes to maintenance mode, and you stay there. Well, for those of you that have experienced that pain, it'll be fixed. We won't be automatically moving those machines out of maintenance mode with the Rocky release, but once you're on Rocky, we will go ahead and track that appropriately because we have no way of knowing how it really got into maintenance mode in the first place. Hopefully that makes sense. Also this cycle, we're hoping to remove classic drivers. This would be the Pixie IPMI tool driver, the Pixie ILO driver. These replaced the hardware types 2 cycles ago, I believe. And we're hoping to get some progress on location awareness of the conductors. Specifically, this would be so that you can have conductors, say, in Australia managing machines in Australia, and conductors in North America managing machines in North America, not vice versa, which should make lots of large infrastructure operators very happy. Beyond Rocky, we're hoping to see BIOS interface implementations fairly quickly. There is some interest from the Redfish community on actually supporting that effort, and we'll probably see most of the vendors focus in that area of supporting via Redfish because Redfish does support that as an option to control the machines. Additionally, we will see more things from Redfish. Currently, the DMTF is working with the Ironic community to try and enhance support for Redfish hardware. We're also hoping to start making some progress on deployment steps. Currently, work on that has stalled, but hopefully we'll pick it back up before the end of the cycle. There's talk of integrating security operations specifically towards attestation. Those of you that were in our ops session earlier today, you may have heard us constantly kind of circling back to reporting back status and data that start borderlining us against attestation services. So that's probably a discussion we need to have in the community of what's reasonable and how far we should go with that. And on our goals for this cycle was to get a plan together for console interfaces and actually start moving in that direction. Not necessarily land any implementation, but make progress. Hopefully next cycle we'll have progress there. We'll see next summit. Unfortunately, our feedback session was earlier today. Unfortunately. So we have an Etherpad that you can all go make comments on. Please leave your name. And I'll go through the Etherpad later and probably next week and send out a mailing list post or 2 summarizing the Etherpad, and maybe there might be more discussions. We'll see. And if you want to provide feedback directly to the Ironic community, the best way is via IRC, #OpenStack Ironic. And if you'd like to contribute, we have a onboarding session later today at 4:40 in room 223. And again, also joining OpenStack Ironic is a good way to get started. And we go by Universal Greeting Time, UGT. So good morning, even if it's 11 p.m. And here we have some links. Do we have any questions?
BIOS options for physical nodes, so the operator would like specify them
So right, the first iteration of this is supporting through manual cleaning. So part of it is providing insight into what the current BIOS settings are. And depending on the interface, we'll cache the BIOS settings whenever the node moves through cleaning. So if you enroll a machine, we'll cache the BIOS settings. If you clean a machine, we'll cache the BIOS settings. This functionality will be such that when you go to, if you apply a manual cleaning process, you will be able to specify the settings you wish to change, and then the BIOS interface will then recache the settings. And because settings can vary by name, by vendor, we're treating it as fairly generic at this point, and hopefully we'll see some standardization possibly around Redfish. But I believe even Redfish has varying names across vendors.
Do you think, to add on to that question, do you think you could add it to like flavors?
The question is to add it, if we could add it to flavors, and I think the Ironic community has coalesced around the idea of supporting it with traits, which would be required traits for flavor that would eventually get posted to the Ironic API, and once we have deploy steps, we could then take action based upon that information, and then during deployment go, oh, the user requested a specific BIOS setting based on this information. Let's go ahead and set it before the machine boots. Any other questions?
I have a question about Ironic. Maybe it's not related to today's topic. After user get Ironic node, he can change. He can use IPMI tools to change IPMI address. How to prevent this situation?
The question is a more security-related question, specifically, how would one prevent an IPMI address being changed via IPMI tool?
Yeah, when the user enter OS, he can use the IPMI tool to change IPMI.
Basically using the internal interface built into hardware to change the out-of-band interface. That's really a hardware vendor security issue at that point. There's no real way we can prevent that, because if the address changes out from under us, we have no ability to know that.
So we should disable it in BIOS setting.
If you have a piece of hardware that supports the ability to disable the operating system side interface, absolutely. Any other questions?
Yeah, related to this, why would you want to do this? Because we were thinking about the same thing. But when we hand out nodes to users and someone changes the IPMI credentials, we would actually notice, or Ironic will notice, because it loses connection to the node, right? Because it can't reset it anymore, it can't check the power status and so on. And when the node comes back for cleaning, we would actually check that, for instance, the user has not added additional accounts with admin rights and this kind of thing. So why would you want to prevent users from changing their IPMI credentials of a node? I don't understand, because you hand out the physical node, and then well, at least in our case, it's the user's node, and he can do whatever he wants.
You actually lose control over the node.
Why?
Maybe you can't even shut it down because you lose power control.
Yeah.
But I notice immediately, Ironic will notice immediately that something is wrong, right? We get notified that someone messed around with the IPMI credentials.
Yeah, but you still have lost the control.
Yes.
You can't recover from the situation with any automated or remote system. You need
That's
to have
true.
someone pushing the button.
Well, you need to push the button and then investigate.
Or you have
It- At that point, you reach a security incident, potentially.
It's been given.
Sorry, we had someone back the room?
Could you talk a little bit more about the routed provider networks?
In what regards would you like to know more about the routed provider networks?
Details of the implementation,
Details of the implementation?
how it relates to Ironic.
In regards to how it relates to Ironics, what's required is knowledge for two things. One, from the Ironic standpoint, we have to be aware of network interfaces and how those are physically attached. In order for instances to be properly scheduled, we have to also supply the information to placement. So I guess it's kind of a circular issue at that point. because if we don't get that information correctly, then an instance might be requested that can't actually be provisioned, and networking setup might fail. Does that kind of answer your question at a high level?
I guess how, I'm looking at it from an operator perspective, how would I use it?
It would be more, you're doing routing in your top-of-rack switch, you're defining physical networks that those machines are on, and you define a physical network.
I get the main thing is that
I'm trying to walk through it in my head.
Yeah, so from Ironic's perspective, we're just making sure that we're providing enough information to the rest of the OpenStack infrastructure and services, so that things like you should be able to use neutron routed networks with Ironic nodes or VMs without knowing that one's a Ironic node and one's a VM. Like there's nothing specific between it. It's just we've added all of the logic that didn't exist previously to make the rest of the system aware of how the bare metal nodes are physically connected. Because when it comes to scheduling, you need to be able to make the decision about okay, so this routed network is on these physical L2 networks, and so but not on these physical L2 networks, which might be another set of nodes. And so you need to make sure that when someone requests an instance, that you end up on the right physical network for your L3 network.
Right. So between VMs versus Ironic nodes, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that we're making sure that we, before, when we didn't have the Ironic neutron agent, there was no information available to Neutron and Nova to be able to make a successful scheduling decision about where to put the instance based on any of the networking information.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.